What's up guys, welcome to episode 2 of Banda Inku's Rising Sun painting series. I'm super stoked for today's tutorial because today we're finishing up the Oni of Hate. If you haven't watched part 1, hit that pause button real quick and head on over to check out part 1 using the link above, then come back and join us for part 2. To kick things off, we're going to paint that fiery orb in his left hand and create a nice OSL effect. To do this, I first base coated the orb with turquoise and then gave it a wash of a 1-to-1 mix of Biel Tan Green and Drakenhof Nightshade to slightly tint it green and seep into all those intricate designs. I then use the fine detail brush to apply a 1-to-1 mix of blue green and jade green to all the raised details of the orb and create some contrast with all the recessed parts. Next, I started making the orb look like it was glowing by first applying a 1-to-1 mix of blue green and livery green to the middle half of the orb, followed by a 1-to-2 mix of blue green and livery green to the middle of that, and finally some straight livery green to the very center to really amp things up and make it look like it's glowing from the inside. For those who don't have livery green, it's essentially the equivalent of either P3's Necrotite green or Vallejo's Escorpena green with a little bit of yellow added to it. After finishing up the orb, I moved on to painting the fire by first applying a 1-to-2 mix of blue, green, and white to the bottom half of the fire and a little bit onto the orb. I then thinned some blue-green with Glaze Medium to help keep the paint wet, and wet blended it together with the previous layer so that it covered about the middle third of the fire. You can find details for how I create my Glaze Medium in the description below. Next, I thinned some turquoise in the same manner and wet blended it onto roughly the upper third of the fire, followed by a 2-to-1 mix of turquoise and black applied to the very tips of the flames. After that, I created a glaze of dead white using Glaze Medium and distilled water and applied this to the various ridges of the flames to create the hottest areas of the fire. With the orb and flame now complete, it was time to start creating that OSL effect. To do this, I first applied an equal mix of Bloody Red, Warlord Purple, and Turquoise to the majority of the skin around the flames. I did this assuming that the light from the blue fire would cause the red skin around it to appear more purpley. After that, I started building up the blue glow by applying multiple glazes of turquoise over the majority of that purple. I then blended in some blue-green, followed by a 1 to 2 mix of blue-green and white, applying each one so that it overlapped a smaller area of the previous color, and applying each one closer and closer to the flames. Then to finish off that OSL, I applied some thin Livery Green to small areas of the hands and the flames, which were close to the Livery Green sections of the orb. I then used the 1-to-1 mix of turquoise and black to base coat all the hair on his head, face, and the 2 tassels on his knees. This took a surprisingly long time due to this guy having one heck of a mane. I highly recommend busting out one of your bigger brushes to do this, and to take your time to make sure you get the paint into all those little nooks and crannies. Then to start popping out all those intricate details, I first dry brushed on a mix of turquoise, black, and dead white in a 1-to-1 to 2 mix and applied this all over the hair, followed by a 1-to-1 to 4 mix, which I focused more towards the middle of the hair and the edges. I then applied some more dramatic highlights to the very tips of the hair using straight dead white. After all that dry brushing, the hair was looking kinda dusty, so I gave it a wash of Drakenhof Nightshade, then with an equal amount of distilled water. Doing so helped bring it all together and tone down that dusty look without knocking down the highlights too much. Then to finish up the hair, I took a fine detail brush and applied some of that 1-to-1 to 4 mix to the very ends of the hair, as well as any of the areas that I felt that the dry brush didn't hit as well as I'd like. At this point, I realized I'd forgotten to paint up his little happy trail, so I followed all the same steps previously mentioned to paint that up, with the only differences being instead of dry brushing, I used a fine detail brush, and being a rather small area, I didn't worry about applying any of the wash. I then painted his little belly gem by first applying a base coat of turquoise, followed by a highlight of blue-green applied to the lower third, then a little shadow on the top third using black, followed by a little white dot in the top corner to create a little light reflection, and finally adding a little line of a 1-to-1 mix of blue-green and dead white to help it look like light is shining through it. Next I used black to base coat the handle of his spear, then dry brush on a highlight using a 2-to-1 mix of dead white and black, followed by a dry brush of black to blend it all together. I then remembered that I meant to finish up those tassels before moving on to the spear, so I went back and undercoated those tassels that are underneath the loincloth using some dead white, followed up with a base coat of bloody red, then a wash of caribou crimson, and finally some highlights of orange fire to pop out all those details. I then used burnt umber to undercoat all the metal and bone pieces in order to make base coating them in future steps a little easier. I then applied a couple coats of P3's solid gold to all the metal bits and Bonewhite to all the bones. After getting all those areas base coated, I washed them all down with some Smokey Ink. I then highlighted all the gold pieces in a couple different stages. For the first stage, I applied some solid gold to all the edges and flatter areas where light would be being reflected. Then for the second stage, I use a 4:1 mix of solid gold and model air chrome to create the first highlight, and then a 2:1 mix to create the final highlights. Then for the bones, I drybrush on some Bonewhite to catch the majority of all the raised areas, and then follow that up with a fine detail brush to pick out any remaining details on the skulls and the teeth. After that, it was on to the eyes, which I really wanted to make pop. So to do so, I first took some violet ink and applied it around all 3 of his eyes, followed by a bit of dead white to pop out each of the pupils, and then a couple coats of yellow ink. Since violet and yellow are complementary colors, meaning they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, this combination of colors created an intense contrast and helps the eyes to really pop. Next, I pulled out my box of rocks and dug through it until I found a few that I liked. I then put that box away and pulled out my other box of rocks and dug through that one as well to get a good variety of stones to use on the base. Now, one quick thing I want to mention is you don't have to go out and buy special fancy pants rocks that are, quote, specifically made for miniatures. You can get a perfectly good, massive bag of rocks that will last you till the end of time from the garden section of your local Home Depot for literally $3 to $5, as compared to the $12 to $15 that a little jar of special rocks is gonna cost you. Just wanted to put that out there for anyone that is looking to buy a bunch of rocks. After picking out which rocks I wanted to use and experimenting with the placement of those rocks, I applied a bunch of Vallejo's brown earth texture paint to the base, and then placed the stones in the desired areas, and then came back with that brown earth and placed some around the stones so it didn't look like they were just sitting on top of the dirt. I then primed all the stones using Vallejo's Polyurethane Black Primer, as well as outlined the trim of the base. As I've mentioned before, I definitely recommend using one of your crappier brushes to apply this primer, since it will kind of wreak havoc to whatever brush you choose to use. After that base had fully dried, I put some dead white and black on my wet palette and blended them together to create a nice spectrum from dark gray to white, and then use this to dry brush the rocks in various stages to pop out all that stony texture. I don't know about you guys, but I found it extremely satisfying to watch all that texture pop out as I applied more and more layers. It was just really satisfying. So much so that I actually went back and primed a rock just for fun, just so I could dry brush it. After finishing up the rocks, I applied a heavy dry brush of a 1-to-1 mix of Ochre Brown and Dead White to all the dirt to start popping out all the little details. I then washed down the base with a 2-to-1 mix of Agrax Earthshade and wash base, focusing it mainly on the dirt, but also overlapping a little bit onto the rocks to help blend them together. Once that wash was fully dry, I once again used that 1-to-1 mix of Ochre Brown and Dead White to pop out select areas of the dirt and help them stand out. Then for the final step, I add some dry green tufts to the base and applied some varnish to protect those many hours of work. And there you have it, the Oni of Hate is now complete. Thank you guys for joining. I hope you've enjoyed watching this guy come together over parts 1 and 2. For those of you who watched the full versions of each, thank you very much. I think you are super awesome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for checking out the content and just for being the awesome people that you guys are. Which reminds me, we have to give a shout out to someone because I left a comment in part 1 that said whoever got the closest to guessing how long this guy took to paint will get a special shout out in part 2. We actually only had 2 people that participated there, so both of you guys are going to get a shout out. So the first one was Raphael C with an estimation of 7 hours and 39 minutes. Also, we had Dr. Bo 6 with an estimation of 8 hours and 15 minutes. So shout out to both of you guys, and thank you for leaving a comment. Now for us how long this guy actually took to paint. This guy actually took 50 hours to complete. I spent about the whole month of March painting this guy. And only this guy. I don't think I painted any other miniatures. So let's just say I'm definitely glad to now move on to another miniature. Thank you guys for joining. Hope you enjoyed the video. And hope we'll see you on the next one. Only a paint complete. Banda out.